Welcome to another episode of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Phil Sellers. I'm also the practice director for Modern Data Center here at XenTegra. And want to say thanks for spending some time with us. This is another one of those content with context sort of situations. We like to take the content we find online from our partners and add our real world context, our experiences, and anything we're hearing from our clients collectively and add that to learn together. So I want to say welcome and introduce my co host for today, Jirah Cox, architect at Nutanix, and all around good guy.
Phil, who's your peer at XenTegra that would be the practice director for Archaic Data Center?
Archaic data center.
If you're modern data center, right, then that
I,
implies somebody else is
I
doing the
think
Stone
he's
Age
that.
stuff.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's that statue of Matthew we've got in the office or something, just posed over there, made out of marble.
The classic Renaissance data center, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Classical data center. That's got a ring to it, right? It just seems like something you would do with a gray beard and what do you call it, the little spectacle, like Mr. Peanut?
A monocle.
A monocle, yes. That just
I mean,
classic data center.
between you, me, and the recording, if you launch that position, please let me know.
Director of Classical Data Center.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. I mean, we do talk about modern data center, modern sort of things, an awful lot, and that's on purpose. We think that the data center has changed, and there are a lot of ways you can choose to get the job done, but we advocate for a simplistic way with lots of choice and a lot of power. So that brings our friends like Jirah from Nutanix onto the podcast to talk about all things going on. Um, but this will be a kind of interesting conversation because this isn't necessarily the traditional world of Nutanix, is it, Jirah?
Uh, I guess not. I mean, to be coy, and have the audience not read into what we're talking about. Yes, it's newer to Nutanix for sure.
Yeah. But it's a good thing. I mean, it still follows the core tenets of choice, simplicity, and performance that sort of underlie everything Nutanix does. I don't know that that's an official three-word tag, but I think it describes what Nutanix does really well. So we'll pull back the suspense here and read you into what we're talking about. We're reviewing a blog post from May the 7th on Nutanix.com/blogs. Title of today's post is Nutanix and Canonical partner to simplify Kubernetes deployments with NKP and Ubuntu Pro. Wow.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's very
Partnering
exciting.
with a Linux provider. So,
And I mean, I'll even say, I'm not going to assume this was part of the business negotiations, but my personal favorite distro of choice for the last
yeah,
15
I was gonna
years.
say that it's near and dear to my heart. I learned on Red Hat varieties many moons ago, but yeah, let's be honest. Like, go a little nerdy here. May lose a few listeners. Bear with us, but
On this podcast?
I don't know. RPM was an amazing thing. Package management and things like that with Red Hat was incredible to me as a young person trying to learn Linux. And Ubuntu got all those things right. Apt and the package management is fantastic. And so yeah, it's my preferred distribution too. I think they're just also a really good community partner in general, and so I like them for that.
They definitely were. I think in my experience, were yeah, early on in the community building. Well, okay, I'm sorry for the nerdy pop quiz. Phil, do you know what Ubuntu means?
I don't specifically know what it means. I do know that it is a term from Africa, if I'm
True.
not mistaken, and I can't
Correct.
remember what it means.
It means I am what I am because of what we all are.
Yeah.
And so the
Mm.
community aspect of it is even in the naming of the distro. I used to actually send off for the free DVDs, right? Every single new, rodent named release, rodent or I guess animal kingdom named release. And for a while, I had them on my bookshelf, and then I realized that was really quite silly. But yeah, they were great. So the community is right there, baked into even the naming of Ubuntu, and not to get terribly inflammatory here, but yeah, it's like usable, friendly Debian. Sorry,
Absolutely.
sorry, Debian diehards. Um, but what do you mean Debian's not friendly and usable? You know, check out our forums. Um, okay, we'll stop that. But yeah, and the other funny tie in here for this theming of, okay, of course the headline announcement is you can now use um, use Ubuntu, and really Ubuntu Pro, right? The actual commercially supported variant, not the community supported variant, as the underlying substrate OS for running the NKP container platform, which is great, and fantastic for all of our joint customers. Um, I scrolled past a meme earlier today in other nerd circles, right? That was like, oh, it's serverless, but then you look under the covers and it runs on servers, right? And so the tie-in here would be, okay, it's containers, so I don't care about the OS, and underneath that is the OS, is
Yeah.
an OS.
Yeah, and here I'm going to ask the stupid question. Why would you want to run NKP in an Ubuntu VM on Nutanix?
But or anywhere, right? In a VM or anywhere, yeah, for sure. So, and I guess here's my simplistic answer back is because so the containers have to run on Kubernetes. Kubernetes has to run on an OS somewhere. You could run that on like a free open source community supported Linux distro. That option does not go away, just because there's now this also strong partnership with Canonical for Ubuntu Pro. Um, but folks like security teams, right? Folks like IT leadership love to be able to say there's support at every level of the stack, um, or we get better than say free open source software SLAs around things like CVE patching, right? Vulnerability management, rapid mitigation, and so that's um, to skip a little bit ahead to some of the F's and B's, as they say, of what this brings to the stack. That's something that Ubuntu Pro has in spades over something that's would be a community based distro.
Yeah. And two, I think you hit the nail on the head. First of all, is that long-term commercial support. That's necessary for the enterprise and for really any business, right? Security has to be at the forefront. So getting those vulnerabilities patched, not having, as aggressive of an upgrade cycle as open source sometimes forces upon people. These are problems that Ubuntu Pro solves. Their long-term releases, not unlike the model that Nutanix has had with their long-term releases have always helped with that from a supportability standpoint. Um, but you mentioned naming too, I think briefly there. I love the naming. 2504 right now is Plucky Puffin. I mean, come on. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, do you not need a Plucky Puffin in your life? I mean, like, come on. Like, at the end
My
of
life is my life is plucky, puffin deficient for sure,
the
which is also a tongue twister.
It is. It
um,
is. They all have been. But yeah, this is a real thing for the enterprise, and obtaining support and keeping things up to date. That's a huge thing. But this is also an embrace of a NCI-less way to leverage NKP because this Linux can run on bare metal and
Very
still
true.
support NKP.
Very true. In fact, I mean, with all respect to our friends at Ubuntu, not even a new capability introduced here, right? Like NKP, since before it joined the Nutanix family, um, right, has been able to be part of your fleet management running containers anywhere, including on bare metal for sure.
Right.
Now, of course, I would submit the same value prop exists for using like an Ubuntu Pro on bare metal as it does exist for
Absolutely.
in a VM. It's security doesn't really care what the substrate is. It's an OS that needs some kind of a patch or mitigation. So, chop chop, get to it. Um, and I like the way that you Phil called out like uh, aligning more closely with enterprise patching, right?
Mhm.
Because so one of the earliest things that the article calls out here that um, uh, one of the promises, right, of this platform from Canonical is 10 plus years of security maintenance.
Mhm.
So it actually kind of separates out what in most like consumer OSs are together intertwined, mitigation of CVEs and security vulnerabilities and patching. And now with this, you get those are intentionally broken out. I can mitigate um, findings from my security scanners very rapidly, but not actually rev the version of the software that runs my stuff, which might need a new requalification or go back through the lab or whatever, go back through engineering. Um, I can securely patch, but not have to upgrade.
Well, and Canonical has a feature called Live Patch, also helping where it doesn't actually require a reboot. So you're able to do kernel vulnerability patching, so very low level in the operating system, while keeping the system online. And so that's a huge differentiator for running NKP on a Ubuntu Pro system. So, you know, that and a host of other security features, as with any pro or enterprise release, they're really talking about security here under the open source canonical umbrella.
Yeah, and that matters so much to practitioners, right? Because containers can't live migrate, right? So
Right.
to drain the host of the containers, the pod that's running, right? They have to get restarted somewhere else, which could be if I only ran one of them, or if it was like a monolithic app in my container ecosystem, would be minimally disruptive to my user base. If I can patch the host with the pods staying right where they are, that's of course way, way better. I can now patch honestly kind of like the rest of the NCI stack non-disruptively during the business day at the time of my choosing and get those nights and weekends back and not need to be on my laptop on a Friday night on the VPN to push out a patch.
Yeah. And I think that's the other part of this too is beyond the patching, you've got choice again in ways to deploy cost mitigation, things like that. If you're running NKP on bare metal, Ubuntu Pro, you're not going to have some of the same features you get on NCI that are storage specific and things like that. But for certain workloads, that may be okay. If you've got ephemeral workloads that don't necessarily need data, but then you've got databases, this gives you a way to unify NKP across all of your different operating environments while also benefiting from the unique value that you get from an NCI deployed NKP stack. So again, getting a high level of choice in the way that you do things while being able to benefit from common standard operational practices.
Totally. I mean, if I picture like, you know, containers running underneath like a cache register, that probably doesn't really need an NCI stack, right? But there's still going to be a container host, right? And that's going to need some kind of patching. So now I can, my security team or my container team can now patch whether it is in the data center, in the cloud, onto the cache register, all with one mechanism, right? And one level of service to the business of now our OS patching doesn't need to take anything down or ever be noticed.
Well, and I love that you went there with your example of cash registers because I hate to use fast food, but it's an approachable thing we all interact with. And every one of the restaurants now has an app, which means they're running some level of infrastructure in every one of those stores. And everyone who's doing some level of door dashing and stuff like that, all of our restaurants, especially post COVID and during COVID, they became incredibly more connected. And
Mhm.
a lot of them chose to create and architect these mobile applications and these user experiences on containers and on Kubernetes. That's something that we see over and over and over again with our enterprise customers. They're choosing to go this route. And it makes for that infinite scale when you've got hundreds or thousands of different points of presence. It's just the way that the industry has shifted. Do you think we'll see that experience shift move down to smaller businesses over the next few years?
Absolutely. I mean, the easy one to always reach for when we're, doing a thinking deep thoughts about the future, of course, is AI, right? Like,
Sure.
and even with even staying on fast food for one more second, like we've all seen the screenshots, right, of places experimenting with voice to text for ordering, right?
Yeah.
And so, do I want
Shout
that
out
to
to
run?
Bojangles.
There you go. So do I want that to run? Do I want that to run in the cloud and pay by the token, or do I want that to be effectively a container sitting on a GPU or adjacent to a GPU
Yeah.
that can run through, the latest whatever Whisper model it is that can do voice to text reliably and generate the order in my structured data format and push that over to the cash register. Um, and yeah, it's easy to imagine that kind of use case not needing a whole lot of virtualization, but needing an awful lot of governance around lifecycle of the containers and the things that run them for
Yeah.
sure. And at that point, uh, retail broadly, right? I think I mean this very respectfully. It's like an AI playground, right? Like AI applied to retail broadly is I think a very much booming already and only going to be growing industry.
Yeah, I can only imagine what things I was seeing in the retail space around video, not just
Yep.
surveillance, but
Hmm.
analysis of what do traffic flows through my stores look like? What attracts more attention? If I redesign this end cap in my store, which end cap gets more attention? What brings people to that and makes them more intent to buy? All
Yeah.
of those kinds of things being run.
Or even like, I mean, it's easy to imagine A/B testing across stores,
Mhm.
right? With data driven, let's take the subjective analysis out of it, right? Here's the data that this end cap in that store makes people linger more than that one in that store. Therefore, next week that one becomes our new standard, on our layout models.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Amazon app, they A/B test a lot on this in live. That transaction where the checkout looks a little different,
Hmm.
that's not a mistake, y'all. That's them
Yeah.
doing live A/B testing with their audience. And so that's the kind of thing that is happening more and more in the physical world now, just like you're talking about. And we didn't have access to some of that. I thought it was cool that a video could be used to count the number of people, foot traffic, but that was 10 years ago. And we've come so much further beyond that today. Um, Sentiment analysis, of voice and of text, for
Real
call
time
centers.
inventory.
Yeah. Oh, the inventory stuff. I mean, all the little robotics and applications inside of warehouses. We have a large retail customer. The systems in their warehouses cannot go down. That
Mm.
is death to them, and it is an exponentially expensive per minute cost. And so that uptime becomes paramount for the infrastructure that's behind the scenes. But to bring that closer and full circle, now we're talking about some of that same stuff running in a chicken shack down the road.
Yeah. Well, or even most of these uh retail environments also, maintain like a store lab, right? Or a test store nearby HQ for rapid prototyping, right, and development. And so how do I ensure that the way I deploy to a science project lab also is the way I roll out at scale in prod across the actual retail edge? So that kind of standardization leads to simplicity, leads to uptime as well.
Well, and that drives the need for consistent, reliable, flexible infrastructure as a basis. Then you can iterate and then you can try this crazy stuff on top of it because the difficult, complex stuff has been
Yeah.
made simpler.
Mhm.
You can
The
focus
actual
on the fun stuff.
with all the respect in the world for my container colleagues now, who are genuinely smart people, I often oversimplify containerization to this is the fashionable way to install an application. Right. Now, it actually does have a bit more complexity and scaffolding underneath of it, sure. But the complexity is worth it when I want to install it 100 times a day, right?
Mhm.
Is then, to your point, when I can automate that with guaranteed outcomes, now I get to go to the fun part, right? And spend less time automating infrastructure and more time actually driving business value on the app layer on top of that.
Absolutely. I moonlighted as an app dev many, many years ago. So I feel for them, but like I never did app dev to the level that people do today professionally. Um, but even then, there's something rewarding about that cycle of iterating and improving and showing your work in real time. And so that drives the behavior you're talking about of deploying, 100, 250 times a day as you're iterating through and making incremental progress on the bigger problem that you're solving. It's fun stuff. We may have gotten a little off topic, but underlining kind of why we're here today, Nutanix and Canonical, their partnership is strong. NKP on Ubuntu Pro opens and solves some real core enterprise problems in terms of security, flexibility, and longevity, but also choice and how you choose to go to market and meet your business needs. So, Jirah, I appreciate you talking with me again today and just kind of going back and forth around this topic of Kubernetes and our favorite distro.
Thank you for wrapping it up. I need to go find some fried chicken.
Seed planted. All right, everyone, have a great day, and we will see you on the next episode.